We need to talk about ideas, good ones and bad ones. We need to learn stuff about the world. We need an honest, intelligent, thought-provoking, and entertaining review of what the hell happened on this planet in the last 7 days. We need to sit back and listen to the Iron Fist and the Velvet Glove.
Welcome back, dear listener. Yes, we had 2 weeks off, but we're back as this humble podcast gradually drags its ass towards episode 500, at which time it may not continue. We're up to 466, and I'm Trevor, a.k.a. the Iron Fist, coming all the way from regional Queensland, Scott the Velvet Glove. How are you, Scott?
Good, thanks, Trevor. G'day, Trevor. G'day, Joe. G'day, listeners. I hope everyone's doing well.
And direct from Peter Dutton's electorate on the outskirts of the north of Brisbane,
Yay.
Joe the Tech Guy.
Evening.
Yeah. Yes, we're back for another episode. Sorry about last week. I forget what happened. But anyway, what's on the agenda for this show this evening? Well, a little bit of local stuff. We'll talk about the Port of Darwin and working from home, sort of local election issues. And then, of course, we have to talk about Trump and those tariffs and what the hell is going on with those. What does it all mean? And see where we end up after all that, because it's quite an extraordinary thing to crash the stock market and piss off pretty much every other country on the planet. He certainly knows how to annoy a large number of people, Scott.
He's not going to have any friends before too long.
Well, did he have any before?
No, he probably didn't have any friends, but it's just, if you actually look at the history of tariffs, they've had three attempts at it.
Yes.
They're about 100 years apart.
Yeah.
And what was the result in those first two? Great Depressions.
Well,
Do they honestly believe they're going to end up being wealthy this time?
I think you're forgetting the very first one. Like when they founded the Republic, there was tariffs that were probably quite successful at the time in protecting American industry from the British.
Yeah, but that was before when they had infant industry arguments and everything else. That was probably a reasonable time for them to exercise protective barriers and that sort of stuff.
Scott.
However, yes.
You go ahead. No, I was going to say we don't go into tariffs, but why not? Let's keep going. Go on, sorry.
Okay.
Keep going. Yep.
No, because it was probably a reasonable argument for them to have, they had infant industries and that sort of stuff that needed to be protected from the British and the Europeans.
Yes.
I had absolutely no problem with that. However, to argue that America would be better off reverting back to a time when they used to stitch their own T-shirts is just garbage. They can get T-shirts made in Vietnam for less than 10% of what it would cost them to make them themselves.
Mm-hmm.
It's a crazy infantile argument that you can reinvent a mass manufacturing market and that sort of stuff in the United States, because the average worker and that sort of stuff over there has enjoyed higher wages for a very long time. And I don't know what you're going to do with these people that aren't bright or anything like that. I've got no doubt about that. It's one of those things that I think has been a failing of my side of politics for sure, that actually do want liberalised trade.
Which side? Which? Because you've chopped and changed a few times.
Yeah, I know that.
Anyway,
You say
yours in the past. Which one?
Mine in the past.
When you were a card-carrying liberal, is that the one? Or?
Well, I was a card-carrying liberal. That's right, because we were very much into free trade and that type of thing.
Yes.
Now, even the Labor Party these days is into free trade.
Yeah.
Now, probably the only ones that are opposed to free trade on the right would be probably the Trumpettes of Patriots, also Pauline Hanson's One Nation Party.
Yes.
And then on the left, you've got the Greens are probably opposed to free trade.
Yes.
So you've probably got that sort of thing. However, the lion's share of the politics in this country accepted that free trade was a good idea. Now, we have lost a car industry because of that. No doubts there. It's just one of those things. We've got to find a way to re-employ those people, Now, I would have thought that if they were still unemployed, we would have been hearing stories all over the media about all those people that they still can't find work. Because how long has it been since we manufactured cars in this country?
Quite a while.
It's got to be what? It's got to be at least 10 years, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So anyway, it's been a very long time, and if we still had people that were unemployed from 10 years ago, I think we would have heard about it. But we haven't been hearing a hell of a lot about it. So I assume that most of them are working again now. Now, as to how much they're earning, I dare say it's a hell of a lot less than what they used to earn on working on the factory floors, but they are earning something. Now,
Depends. If they're a real estate agent, they'll be doing all right.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I just don't know what you're going to do with people that have worked on a factory floor all their lives.
You've got
to say again.
So you can reskill them.
Yeah, I know, but doing what? See, it's all right for the three of us because we've used that different set of muscles. We've used the muscles that lie between our ears. So we're right. We can be reskilled in a whole lot of things. But if you've never used the muscles between your ears, then you could actually have some difficulty reskilling.
Reskill them into the building trade.
Yeah, you could always reskill them into building trade, yeah.
Bring the prices down to building.
It depends on the skills that sometimes you get lucky and unlucky. Like, was it radiographers reading sort of ultrasounds or other stuff? You know, a lot of AI and stuff does that a lot better now, like things like that. Interpreters are probably going to become out
obsolete.
Of date. And I mean, they've been using their grey matter, just got unlucky in the field that they decided to do it. People doing coding, for example, like a lot of, no joke, coding's still essential.
Oh, no. AI makes up some wonderful code that'll keep a programmer employed for months fixing it.
Right, okay. There you go. In the chat room, Alison's here. Hello, Alison. Look, let's put some structure to this conversation, Scott. So, Donald Trump has basically trashed the World Trade System. He claims that America's trade deficit is caused by the rest of the world ripping off the US. And he says things like, over the decades, they ripped us off like no country has ever been ripped off in history. And he blames the rest of the world for America's deficit.
He blames the rest of the world for America deliberately making itself the world standard for trading and forcing its dollar up high so that they had cheap stuff to buy and makes their stuff relatively expensive.
He's blaming the rest of the world because American consumers bought overseas products. Nobody held a gun to their head for that particular thing. They might have had a gun held to their head for other things, but
they bought things from overseas because they were cheap, and they were cheap because America became the backbone of the financial market because everyone traded in US dollars, which made US dollars expensive.
America deindustrialized. They sent they outsourced making stuff to cheap, low-wage countries. But it was American companies that went over there and started up factories. The Chinese were smart and said to any foreign investor, you just can't come here and have a 100% owned factory making cheap stuff and selling it. You've got to enter into a joint venture partnership with somebody local. So they were really smart, the Chinese, in forcing that. But essentially, they just shifted the manufacturing capacity overseas and left America with a finance and service industry and nothing else. And for Trump to blame these other countries for America buying stuff from them, ludicrous. It'd be insane.
The other example is he was complaining about Germany with their cars. And given a choice between a German car and an American car, which would you buy?
I'd take a German car.
Most people would. So
it's like
why aren't the Germans buying American cars?
Because they're basically shit cars compared to what the Germans.
Well, exactly.
Yeah, it's like I saw something very amusing the other day that Stephen Fry was defending Elon Musk. He said, "No, Musk isn't a Nazi. The Nazis made decent automobiles.
That's a good one.
Yeah.
So-
Well, I heard he was a Nazi because the Nazis were building rockets that went into space.
Well, there you go. There is that. So, yeah. Right. Tariff theory generally, as you mentioned, Scott, kind of you were alluding to. Tariffs as a temporary measure to nurture an infant sector is a perfectly legitimate practice. Makes
It is.
sense that you put in tariffs, make imports expensive so people support the local industry until it gets on its feet. In fact, it's potentially or most likely impossible for an infant sector to get on its feet without tariffs, which is what America has understood through the IMF and the World Bank for decades, where it has forced poor developing countries that one of the conditions for getting loans is they must open up their economies to foreign investors and they must not introduce any tariffs. And that's why so many countries have been unable to build a industrial sort of sector because the IMF and the World Bank, through the Americans, wouldn't let them put up tariffs. So that's the first part of tariffs. As a measure to protect sectors that are in the national interest, like after COVID, when we needed respirators and we couldn't build them. You might decide, you know what, we need some sort of light manufacture capacity in this country, and we're going to put in tariffs just so that we've got a sector that's uncompetitive but is really handy to have in emergencies of some sort. And again, that would be perfectly fine practice to sort of come up with. That makes sense. But in both of those, you've got a plan. With Trump, what he's doing is overnight putting in these tariffs, supposedly because overnight America will produce the products that were previously being imported. And that is impossible.
Well, what he says and what he actually wants to do are two different things. He wants to slash income tax because income tax hit his rich mates and tariffs are a regressive tax. They affect poor people much more than rich people. So he wants to get rid of income tax and replace it with a tax on goods and services.
What people haven't mentioned is, I mean, if this does proceed for any length of time, they're going to collect a huge amount of money in tariffs.
Yeah, they are. And then he's planning on giving that. He's going to give that all back to his rich mates by extending the tax cuts.
Yeah, so if he was planning to take all that money and give it to the poor, maybe it would be a good, if he said, I'm going to put all these tariffs in, I'm going to create some sort of proper...
social welfare net? Yeah.
Yeah, then you'd go, oh, okay, that's a plan. But the idea to sell people that these people have been ripping us off and now we're going to...
Rip them off.
Punish them, but he's actually, as we know, punishing the American consumer. Prices are going to go up. And they have no chance, even on simple things like beef. Overnight the price goes up. They can't just raise a cow overnight. It does take time, even if you've got the land to actually produce the replacements. So, and the idea that that anybody would invest in factories with this nincompoop in charge, ludicrous. So it's just going to add to the cost of stuff in America.
If we were to run a hypothetical and say that the Soviet Union managed to get an agent placed at the top of the American political system and wanted this agent to split up NATO and to destroy America's economy, what do you think they would do?
Yeah. So,
I mean, I'm not saying that he is, but bloody hell, he's acting like it, isn't he?
I think he is actually a Russian plant.
Yeah. Julius has had these tariffs past Congress yet.
They don't need to pass Congress.
Correct.
Yeah. And this is the reason why he's doing this as one of his big things is because he doesn't have to negotiate with Congress over it. So, in theory, Congress could pass a law to try and prevent him from doing it, but
then it would go to the Supreme Court, who like the unitary executive.
Yeah.
In other words, the president has ultimate power.
Yeah.
It's interesting that Republican politicians are no longer doing town halls, because every town hall that they turn up to, they get berated.
Yeah. It's one of those things I can't wait for the midterms just to find out how many of them are left standing.
Yeah. Maybe a surprising number still are. Like, they're literally, they could say to Americans, look, we're going to chop your leg off. In the short term, it's going to hurt, but in the long term, it's going to be better off for you. And a fair number of them would actually believe it, it would seem. So, yes. There's no program to nurture a domestic industry. So it would take years to build factories and train the workers, etc. So in the short term, prices in the USA will increase. So overall USA demand will fall as consumers don't have enough money. So we, for example, sell America beef. It's going to be more expensive. For that reason, Americans are just going to buy less of it because there's going to be a whole range of things that they just can't buy anymore at the same price. So that demand from that country is going to reduce. But lots of countries are basically going to implement their own tariffs against America. So America, for example, exports beef to Japan, China, South Korea, Canada, Mexico. So all those countries quite likely will put in tariffs against American beef.
Mm-hmm.
And they're going to be turning around going, well, American beef is now expensive. Where can we get some? Oh, those Australians, they've got some extra now that they don't need. So what we lose in selling to America,
we will pick up by selling to other countries.
Depending on what it is, there might be a good chance of selling it somewhere else.
Have you heard Yanis Varoufakis has said, actually, this is going to work? So this will basically devalue the dollar and will make a difference to America's competitiveness.
Right.
So he argues that actually it seems stupid on the front of it, but it moving to the mid to long term, nothing to do with America protecting their trade. It's all about devaluing the dollar.
Right. There must have been easier ways to devalue the dollar.
Well, I would have thought so.
In terms of just artificially doing things in the bond market and the interest rates.
Yeah, and they don't want to devalue the dollar too much because then it doesn't become tradable.
Right. Yeah. It's a hard way to go about devaluing your dollar
exactly.
to do that. But maybe. I mean, who knows?
I don't even think Trump wants the dollar to be devalued, does he? He's made all sorts of public statements.
No, apparently, not him particularly, but people behind him who actually have some smarts. They're saying, if we devalue the dollar by the right amount, it makes us more competitive and therefore we can sell more.
Okay.
Yeah. So, Trump, of course, he just doesn't care about the reality. It's just the headline. He sees surplus countries as winners and the USA as a loser if it's in a trade deficit. So he just sees the world as winners and losers.
But also, he's slapping tariffs on Ireland because they have a deficit of goods, but the US has a deficit of services.
We will get into the calculation errors momentarily, Joe.
Oh, right, okay.
Yeah. But just the motivation of the guy is he wants to be a seller, not a buyer. So he sees a relationship as a deficit, as an overall buyer, which he just sees as losers. So the other thing, of course, is he's not taking into account that a very large share of US imports are from foreign affiliates of American firms.
Yeah.
So when he sees that America as a trade is in deficit with a country, he's not taking it into account that, in fact, a lot of the dollars flowing out of America to that country in Vietnam or wherever it may be are quite possibly going to American firms in Vietnam, places like that. So, but he doesn't care because he doesn't own one of those firms. So he just doesn't give a shit. It's all about
It's one of those things, like under
optics.
Trump 1, he would never have actually continued it for this long because he was actually very aware of the stock market. Now, the stock market's been in free fall lately, and I would know because I watch it every day, and I've seen, I've seen my own theoretical wealth not evaporate, but has gone down substantially. Like I've lost probably $20,000 on the share market. I would have lost probably $40,000 on my superannuation. Now you only lose if you sell, which I've got no plans on selling. But it's just, I just cannot believe that this dickhead is sitting there watching this happen, and he's got to understand that it's his fault. But he just doesn't care.
No. The guardrails have been taken off.
Exactly. And it's just one of those things, like, at least last time there were some adults in the room. You had, but this time he's surrounded himself by sycophants.
Julia in the chat room says he and his family sold their shares before the announcement. He'll buy in again at the bottom.
That really wouldn't surprise me. And in fact, it really wouldn't surprise me at all. In fact, Brian said exactly the same conspiracy theory too, that he would have sold his shares and he'd be prepared to go in and buy them at the bottom of the market.
Talking of such things, did anyone see, I can't remember, somebody is advertising at the moment on Facebook that Dutton sold shares just before something happened?
Right.
Dutton sold...
That was to do with banks when...
He bought some shares. He bought some bank shares and that sort of stuff at the same time. Global financial crisis. And it was when the Labor government announced that they were going to prop up the banks. Right. And the shares shot up on that announcement. Now, I don't think that Dutton actually knew what was happening then because he was in the opposition. It really wouldn't surprise me that he could have been involved in meetings and that sort of stuff where they would have actually said to him, this is what we're going to do. But I don't know that he was actually guilty of it all. It makes for a very good story.
I was going to say, I was interested that somebody is paying lots of money to smear that around.
Yeah, I do think that, look, it smells, but I just don't think he was actually in the right position to actually make any money.
He was in opposition at the time, I think.
He was in opposition, yeah. So I don't think that he would be in on those meetings unless one of his mates was in on those meetings and his mates came out and said to him, hey, Pete, you might want to go and buy some Commonwealth Bank shares. I couldn't tell you.
I'm patting myself on the back, dear gentlemen, dear listener. Because a week ago, I said to my wife, about 8 days ago, I think it's all going to go to shit. I think this market's ready to go to shit.
So
went into the super and put it all into super conservative allocation. Right. Hardly any shares. Boy, am I popular with the wife right now.
You would be, yeah. It's just one of those things.
I am not a trader, but I just had a feeling in my waters.
You probably had a gut feeling that it wasn't going. It's just one of those things. Like, I accept that the share market goes up and down like well, I better not say that. It does go up and down a fair bit. So I was expecting that it would go down at some point because what goes up must come down. I just never expected it would be such a deliberate, ridiculous bloody thing that's been.
So when are you going to buy in?
Say again.
Good question. I reckon it's going to trundle along. Dear listener, this is not a podcast that gives financial advice.
And if you do take financial advice,
I'm merely telling you what I'm doing. I'm not suggesting anything about what you should do.
It's a bit late now anyway.
So I don't know. I'm happy just to sit on it for a little while. Right. But my other one, because I don't trade at all, except I did one other thing 3 years ago and bought just a little punt on gold. I think it was 2.5 years, maybe 3 years ago. It is running at 30% per annum since I bought it. Like, unbelievable. And that was because I've been talking on this podcast about the Chinese are selling US bonds and they're buying gold as hard as they can. And I thought, shit, I should probably buy some gold myself. So Yeah. So anyway, that's only two little financial things. I got lucky. If I'd got unlucky, I probably wouldn't tell you. But
No, I got an ounce
happy
of
with
gold
those
that
two
was-
punts. Yeah.
I've got an ounce of gold that my mum left me when she
Yeah.
died. And I've just
Julia
got it-
says, yeah, but everything Trump has done so far was flagged by him during the election campaign. Why did people not take him at his word? It's true. Like,
It is very
Well,
true.
because-
He's doing exactly what he said he was going to
Because he blustered last time round, he was chopped off, and also because he says so many different things.
yes.
You can't tell. Sure, you know, hindsight is 2020, but he says opposing things on 2 different days. Which one do you take as gospel?
True. But last time when he was in, he didn't understand how it worked, and people told him he couldn't do things, and he kind of believed them. He spent 4 years stewing over it, thinking, when I get in next time, I'm not listening to these people who tell me I can't do stuff. I'm just going to do it.
Well, also he managed to get 3 people into as Supreme Court justices
Yes.
who believe that the president has the ultimate power to make any decision he wants,
Yes. So, yeah, I mean,
including
anybody
execute
looking
his political rivals.
nobody could look at this and go, shock. I would never have expected Donald Trump to do this sort of thing. Like, this is clearly the sort of thing that you could expect from him. So, yeah. So,
Well, it's one of those things. Like, you know, I cannot believe that people actually read all the reports on Project 2025 and said, "Oh, that's my man." You know?
Well, no, but he said he wasn't involved, so they believed him.
Yeah, I know. It's just,
all right, gentlemen, how long until it gets reversed substantially?
That long.
Joe on the screen indicated a very small gap, it seems. Anyone want to guess? Yeah, let's put on a Nostradamus hat and say, okay, there might be a few exceptions here and there, but the majority of this shite is going to disappear. At what point do you think he's going to say, I've had
probably
discussions
6
and-"
months' time.
I reckon after he's lost the midterms.
Right. Yeah. Well, they're due to take effect sometime in April, aren't they?
Yeah, wasn't
Well,
it the
it's
second?
basically starting now, aren't they?
Yeah, it was the second, I think.
Right.
Yeah, it's what he said. It's like on the announcement about Australian tariffs and that sort of stuff. He says, "I love Australians. I love them. Blah 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 blah." But you know, they don't take any of our beef, so we're not going to take any of theirs.
Yeah. I'm with you, Joe. I reckon 4 to 6 weeks, and a lot of it will have been reversed.
Yeah.
But who knows? Crazier things have happened.
I think he's going to bluster through. He doesn't care until it starts hurting him politically.
And, well, given that he can't run for election again,
Well, he's actually looking into it.
Yeah, exactly. Never say never.
you would think, how can things harm him politically if he can't run again? What have he got to lose? But he is hinting that he has some possibility of somehow making a third term.
Well, yeah, I mean, don't forget he's got a Supreme Court that's in his pocket.
Yes.
So they just have to find some excuse that he can run for a third term.
One of them is that J.D. Vance would run as president. And
For a day, yes.
Yes, and having got elected would then resign, and Trump as vice president would then become president again. That's sort of one of the things. But Trump has hinted that there's lots of ways it could happen. So
Be a shame if all those burgers caused his heart to explode in the meantime.
yes, so
It's one of those things. I just think to myself that, you know, because they've put tariffs on Australian beef and that sort of stuff, they reckon the price of Big Mac's going to go through the roof.
so
He doesn't care.
we've just got to remember that the rest of the world is just going to trade between and amongst themselves
Yeah.
as much as they ever have.
Yep.
Yeah, I've actually heard that. I
and
heard
more
that this
so.
morning.
So all of that trade. So, okay, we sell stuff to China, and maybe China's going to be depressed a little because they're not going to be selling as much to America because Americans just won't have as much to spend. But you know, they've been focusing on other markets. The importance of the American consumer to the world economy has been decreasing. So in the same way that countries don't need what America produces unless they're Israel and they're into buying bombs, then it's also in terms of the American consumer less important than they were 20 years ago.
Well, I just think it's absolutely hysterical that, you know, their closest neighbour and that sort of stuff, Canada, has actually signed a deal to buy their, or what do you call it, that radar system from Australia.
Have they?
Yeah,
We sell a radar system.
yeah.
Crikey.
And I think they're looking at a couple of countries have cancelled their orders to buy.
F-35 orders.
Yeah, the Joint Strike Fighter.
Yes.
Yeah, so
And
they're going to
looking
buy
very
them.
hard at the Saab.
Yeah, which is from Sweden, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's one of those things, like, I just think to myself that the Yanks have probably really shot themselves in the foot here, because the F-35's got to be serviced by them and that sort of thing. So I just think to myself that probably the Western countries are going to be looking for, because America has now proven themselves to be a completely unreliable ally. I just think to myself that, do the French still make the Mirage jet?
I think they make an updated one, maybe.
Yeah, they probably do make an updated Mirage. It's just, I just think that the French and the Swedes are going to be the real beneficiaries of this.
Well, and who are the big German?
I couldn't tell you.
I can't remember the name. It's on the tip of my tongue. Anyway, lots of people are looking at buying their artillery systems.
Of
They
course.
just don't. All the Americans' arms. Nobody's trusting the Americans. Even if you bought them when you've got a friendly regime, you get another Trump and you're shit out of luck for spares.
There's one
Exactly.
country that's still trusting them, Joe.
Yeah.
Australia.
Oh.
Fucking
Which is-
hopeless
It
Australian
is
politicians.
absolutely insane. Because Jackie Lambie, I thought, hit the nail right on the head where she said, it's time we tell them to piss off out of what's the name of the secret
AUKUS.
base?
No.
Oh.
Pine Gap.
Yeah.
Pine Gap. Yeah, so tell them to piss off out of Pine Gap. And I think then she might have whispered under her breath, I think it's time we actually tell them to shove their submarines up their ass too.
Well, a perfect opportunity.
It
Peter
is,
Dutton.
it is a perfect opportunity for us to actually say to them, we're not going to give you any more money because we don't trust you.
Peter Dutton suggested that our defence relationship should be used as a tool to negotiate with the US. And what did our Labor Defence Minister Richard Marles say? He came out and said, Peter Dutton has been reckless with his suggestion that our defence relationship should be used as a tool to negotiate with the US. Even former Liberal PM John Howard thinks so. It's a dangerous assertion, and Peter Dutton is dangerous. Don't risk Dutton. So we've just got the most manic USA-loving defence minister, and he's in a Labor government. And even when a Liberal opposition leader is hinting, maybe we should start looking at defence as a bargaining chip. No, you can't do that. That's outrageous. That is in the duopoly that we've got here when it comes to our defence force with these two. This Labor has gone more to the right than the Liberals in some sense. Incredible. If you wouldn't think it's possible.
Absolutely stupid.
But that's where we're at. Vote Green if you don't like that. Yeah, so back to, you mentioned, Joe, the calculation. So Trump was quick to produce kind of a chart showing the tariffs being charged to the USA. And he would say things like China is charging 67%, European Union 39%, Vietnam 90%. And what he was doing was saying, we're being quite generous. We're only going to charge half of what they're charging us. So China charges 67, we'll only charge 34. European Union charges 39, we'll only charge 20. Vietnam, 90, we'll only charge 46. So those awful other countries that are ripping off America by charging a high tariff on their own citizens, according to Trump, he's being generous by only imposing a tariff of half that amount. One problem. The
Most of those
figures,
countries don't charge those
the
tariffs.
No,
figures
exactly.
that he was quoting are completely bogus. These countries are not charging the tariffs that
No,
Trump says they
apparently it's the total trade balance divided by their deficit.
Yes.
It's basically the amount of outstanding balance between the two countries.
They took the trade deficit of the country and divided it by the country's exports.
Right.
That's what they did when calculating these. So they didn't
Yeah,
look
so
at the actual tariff structure that might be in place. So to give an example, Indonesia and America, 17.9 billion trade deficit with Indonesia. So it exports to America 28 billion, and the deficit is 17. So 17 divided by 28 is 64%. So Trump says that ratio is actually the tariff rate. And it's nothing to do with the tariff rate.
Correct. And also,
He's a
apparently they've
fucking
pulled
idiot.
this from the World Fact, CIA World Fact Book or whatever it is,
Yes.
because Norfolk Island, it's apparently for some shoes that Norfolk Island never made and was misattributed by somebody in some ledger somewhere. And the same with Heard and McDonnell Island, again, was a misattribution.
So territories of Australia got charged different rates.
Yes.
And in doing that calculation, not only is it just a crazy calculation, but they did it only for goods and not services.
Yeah.
So in some cases, these countries might have a surplus with America when it comes to trading in goods, but they might be in deficit when it comes to services and might be overall in a deficit, and
Like Ireland.
they're being penalised
Yeah.
as a result. So it's a completely...
Now is a good time to be selling services into America because you don't have to pay any tariffs on them.
Yeah. So yeah, that's the sort of thing. The EU was an example where goods were high one way, services high the other way, pretty much line ball. Trump's ignored that in his calculations. So the idea of just taking a ratio of and saying that is the tariff that these countries are imposing on American goods is just ludicrous. But that's where we're at in the world. Just completely ludicrous, made up shit.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where we're at. So, of course, and just even for some countries where there is a, they're in surplus with America. What's one example here? Take the example of Lesotho. Is that how you pronounce it? Lesotho, thank you. One of the poorest countries in Africa, struck with a 50% tariff under the Trump plan. It's a member of the South African Customs Union and applies the common external tariff structure established by this trading bloc. So there's 5 countries, South Africa, Namibia, Botswana, Eswatini, and how do you pronounce it, Joe? It's
Lesotho.
Lesotho. They're all part of the same block, charging the same tariffs in actual fact. But they're all getting different tariffs rates from the US. South Africa's 30%, Namibia 21%, Botswana 37%, Eswatini 10%. So even though they're part of the same trading bloc with the same tariffs, they're being treated differently because their actual trade proportion ratio is different.
So they just need to export through the cheapest one.
Yes. Yes, and bypass. It's so ludicrous. And, Lesotho, it basically imports $236 million in goods and services, while exporting $7 million worth of... America only exports $7 million worth to Lesotho. Because guess what? This poor African country can't afford fancy American products, whereas the Americans buy the diamonds that Lesotho produces. So
I was going to say most of the American goods that will be given to these countries will be given
Right.
will be charity.
Yes. So there we go. An unbelievably stupid idea if your reason is because, well, in Trump's mind, these countries are evil and have been taking advantage of America for selling Americans
But you know
goods.
he's been saying this since the 80s.
Yes. Yes. There was some tape of him, Joe, talking similarly.
He took out newspaper adverts complaining about how Japan was taking advantage of America.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah.
He's been peddling the same bullshit for years.
Yeah. And as you mentioned, Australia has been given a rate of 10%, Norfolk Island 58%.
Yeah.
Well, it's claimed that there's a deficit of 58%. It's claimed that Norfolk
29.
Island is imposing a 58%
exactly.
tariff on
Despite
America.
being part of Australia.
So he is charging Norfolk Island 29%.
All 1,800 people.
Yes. So don't go running.
That's a huge impact on their markets.
Yeah. So don't go running your export business through Norfolk Island because you'll be charged.
Or
extra.
Heard and McDonald Islands.
Yes.
With a permanent population of several thousand penguins.
Yes. They're at least got a 10%, same as Australia.
Okay. 10% was the minimum.
Yes. But it's just a bunch of penguins.
Yeah.
Like to actually list it as a different item on the spreadsheet is ludicrous. For an island of penguins.
Apparently, there are fisheries out of Heard and McDonald Islands that do sell into America. And it's a premium fish.
Right.
But the deficit wasn't calculated on that because they're all sold from Australia.
Of course.
It was just a screw up on somebody's accounting spreadsheet that went, oh, yes, these came from here. And they didn't.
There we go. There was one country left off the list in terms of being hit with tariffs. Joe, one guess.
Russia.
Yes.
I wonder why.
So what was that theory you had earlier? If you had installed a secret agent, what ideally would you get him to do?
Well, exactly. How would you get him to isolate America from the rest of the world, break up NATO?
Yes. Help Russia in a war against Ukraine.
Yeah.
Yep. And, and as you're scheming with him and you're saying, look, go and impose all these tariffs on everybody. And by the way, don't impose any on Russia. He'd be going, oh, come on, I've got to at least put some on Russia. No, not one. So for all of this, for all these countries that have received special
tariffs. Well, they can't trade with Russia anyway because there's sanctions on Russia.
Well, but that's the argument. The argument from the press secretary was Russia was left off because US sanctions already preclude any meaningful trade. However, the US still trades more with Russia than with countries like Mauritius or Brunei that did make Trump's tariffs list.
And he's talking about relaxing tariffs anyway.
Yeah. So quite remarkable that of all the countries in the world to be left off the list for tariffs, it had to be Russia.
Of course.
Yeah.
He doesn't want to upset Daddy Vlad.
You know, imposing the sanctions on Russia, which it's done for a long time now, actually worked in Russia's favour because it allowed Russia to develop industries that otherwise couldn't get off the ground. And that's why now Russia is not really feeling the pain from US sanctions anymore because they've had the time to develop the infant industries. It's as if they put in tariffs themselves to protect infant industries, which would have been against World Bank, IMF sort of guidelines. But it was imposed externally via sanctions. So it's worked well for Russia in that sense because they took the time to go, you know what, the rest of the world hates us and is going to keep imposing sanctions on us. We better learn to make cheese and other stuff that we need rather than importing it like we used to be. So that's what they did as a heavy sanction regime was put on the Russians. There you go. Yeah. What else have we got here? What did Senator Marco Rubio say? It's not that complicated. China threatens our security and prosperity. At today's meeting with Indo-Pacific partners, we agreed the region needs to be free from China's coercive and unfair trade policies. Our security depends on it. So Trump imposes sky-high tariffs on countries around the world.
And then cuts off aid.
What's that?
And cuts off aid.
Yeah. Threatens to cause a severe crisis in many economies. And Marco Rubio claims China is the one engaging in coercive and unfair trade policies. Of course.
They're a pack of idiots.
Yeah. So, actually, I did have one clip from JD Vance explaining what's happening.
We borrow money from Chinese peasants to buy the things those.
Do you guys get that? It seems to cut off with me when I play these clips.
Yeah, it does. It jumps 6 seconds usually.
Yeah, but on the actual, what people hear out there seems to be okay.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So, what did he say? Vance, he said, we borrow
money from the Chinese to buy
peasants.
Chinese goods. Yes.
Yes, to buy things that Chinese peasants manufacture. So, that's what he's doing there. All right.
Or is it that because there's a balance of US dollars and the Americans don't want to sell US dollars because that deflates their value, they then get forced to basically invest them in in American bonds?
Who invests in American bonds?
So say I'm selling goods into America.
Yep.
And I get lots of American dollars back. I can't cash that out into anything useful. All I can do is buy American bonds as a place to park those dollars.
Yes.
So we are borrowing money from the Chinese peasants is basically the money that we won't let the Chinese peasants take away because that's the value from all our deals.
Yes.
Is paying for the American government to get a very good rate of interest on their borrowing.
Correct. So just going back to the Saudis, and I've said it before a few times, but I'll say it again. When the dollar was decoupled from gold, and basically they said to the Saudis, go around the world selling your oil, but you must sell it in US dollars. And you, of course, are going to accumulate a lot of US dollars. And that doesn't mean you can take those US dollars and buy lots of businesses in America and lots of property. We'll restrict what you can actually use those US dollars for. But you'll be able to buy treasury bonds, which is basically meaning lend the money back to us. And they did the same to China and other countries. So that's what created a demand for the US dollar, which has kept the US dollar quite high, even though the Americans, in one sense, are a banana republic that's just spending more money than they earn and are running deficits all the time. And the Chinese, who had accumulated a lot of US Treasury bonds under that system, for many years now, have been increasingly getting rid of them wherever they can and buying gold instead and other things. And that's why they did the Belt and Road Initiative as a place to spend their money on infrastructure projects, because they get stopped from buying stuff like infrastructure in the Panama Canal or ports in Darwin, where maybe they are allowed to buy them at one point, and then they're told they can't buy them anymore. So that's one of the reasons for the Belt and Road Initiative, was they're sitting on a lot of US dollars and they've got to start spending them, and they can't buy companies and traditional assets. They have to build these things in order to acquire them. So that's kind of how all that happened. But that allows me, Scott, to circle back to the first item on the agenda, which was the Port of Darwin, both parties say they want it back for national security reasons. So we have at the moment, dear listener, a Chinese company, whether it's controlled by the Chinese government or not, who cares? And they own, or they've leased it on a long-term lease, Port of Darwin. And both parties are saying, as part of their election pledges, we're going to end that. In Labor's case, we're going to buy it back from them. The company itself has said, well, nobody's talked to us about a price, so I don't know what you're talking about. But the whole idea that this is some risk to our national security is complete bollocks.
Mm-hmm.
Because what is the worst case scenario? We go all-out war with China and they own the Port of Darwin.
Yeah, but then eventually we just nationalise it.
And we say, well, we're going to take over the port. We don't care, of course, that you own it, and we're going to not let your naval vessels in. Like, it's the risk is all China's by this whole Belt and Road initiative is China's risk because it's building assets in other countries and taking the risk those other countries would get pissed off with them and reclaim them
There's
if
a bit
they're
of a
unhappy.
bigger risk in that all the infrastructure, because it's all computerised, they could in theory break and you would need to come in and put your own infrastructure in.
Well,
Yeah, but that's something that you'd probably have to do anyway. Because if you've got a in Trevor's story, you've got a country that did own the port and has become an enemy combatant country. So you'd actually have to go in there and put in new infrastructure. You'd have to go and rip out all their old computers and everything else and put your own computers in there.
Yeah, I mean, if it was Don Crane's, it would be a fairly simple thing, but because it's all computerised, there's a risk.
I don't know how computerised the Port of Darwin is.
From what I've heard of other ports, and I'm assuming that Port of Darwin is the same, that, they are because just efficiencies.
I can't imagine that many containers go through the Port of Darwin.
No, I'd be extremely surprised.
There's an awful lot of beef.
It could go through another port if it had to. Like, in any event, a full Defence Department security assessment was done on the deal in 2015. The department head, Dennis Richardson, and he gave testimony. Basically, it's a simple, concrete thing. He appeared before a parliamentary inquiry to give a detailed explanation of how Defence considered the implications of the lease in the run-up to the decision to advise Treasury that Defence had no objection to the move. This is the original decision to sell the lease to the Chinese. That the Defence Department looked at it and said, no problem. And he said Defence assessed the risks of a shutdown or sabotage, cyber attacks, the port being used for intelligence gathering, or stealing intellectual property. We did our due diligence very carefully over an extended period of time. Nothing has been said since the announcement that has given us pause for thought. And he mentioned that he ordered a special review of the deal after security experts in Australia raised espionage concerns. He says, after a couple of weeks of it, I personally thought, gee, have we missed something? But he said intelligence agencies backed his initial assessment. The written advice I received on that was that there was no significant implications and it was fine. So he rubbished concerns from security analysts that the deal could give the Chinese Navy access to the port as alarmist nonsense and simply absurd. And
No, but it's
there
a
we go.
vote winner.
Yeah, so it's not a vote winner for me. I'm just going, you idiots. And Dutton was the Defence Minister who voted for the sale of Darwin Port. He and Turnbull flogged it. And the Trade Minister, Andrew Robb, got a 6-figure job with the same company thereafter.
Yep.
It's... And Labor, spineless, gutless, stupid idiots. as a major platform of the election are going, oh yeah, well we'll take it back.
I did see a lovely article that was saying that Trump has wedged Dutton because he's trying to appease the trumpet of patriot voters to try and get them into his party, whilst trying not to upset the mainstream liberal voters who don't want a bar of Trump tariffs, they don't want the Doge, they don't want kicking all the illegals out because he's going to work in the fields.
And guess what? The average Aussie wants to work from home a fair bit as well.
Yeah. Strange that.
So, Scott, did you hear about the backflip?
Yeah, I've read about it, this afternoon.
Yeah. So, again,
it's just one of those things. They've got this obsession with the public service. They reckon it's fat and bloated. It's not fat and bloated. It's just...
So there is a certain government department that I was aware of that went to future ways of working, which was we don't have enough desks in the office for everybody because we know that some people will be on leave, some people will be sick, and some people can work from home. And so actually we're only going to have 50% of the original floor space we used to. We're going to pay less rent. We're going to have less infrastructure. We've got less cooling. We got huge savings by having people work from home. But people who are forced to go and do work in a factory or whatever are resentful of that, despite the fact that their commutes are less because there's less people on the road. And so there is a feeling that they're getting away with doing nothing. And actually, I think the reports are back. Most people are more efficient working from home. There are the odd shirker, but most people are actually more efficient.
Yeah. So anyway, it was one of their few policies that they've come out with was we're going to force all public servants to work from home. And so that meant, A, that anyone who's a public servant who enjoys working from home wasn't going to vote for the LNP. And it also meant people who are in the private sector began to worry that this was the thin edge of the wedge and this would encourage their companies to adopt similar policies in the private sector. And so people really didn't like this idea. And so Dutton has done a backflip and gone, we listened to the people and we have got it wrong. We've apologised for it. We support flexible workplace arrangements, he told reporters. Yeah. These guys are just so amateurish. Honestly, they are. There's no way they are at all ready to run a government.
No, exactly.
Just a handful of policies. One of them, like this one, they've just backflipped on. Others, like reclaiming the Port of Darwin, equally
it's just populist shit, isn't it?
Yes, just populist shit. So,
well, they've got to actually do something that stops people thinking about their nuclear article.
Yeah. Having said that, I'm still going to go with my prediction of a Dutton victory.
I don't think so.
I hang around a lot of boomers down here on the coast.
Yeah, I know, but the boomers are actually a smaller voting bloc.
I'm just hoping that Ellie gets enough votes to get rid of him.
I know they are, Scott, but I just there's a lot of them still.
Yeah, I know there are still a lot of them, but they're not in the majority anymore.
But Scott, here's my argument. I've said before, everyone who voted for Scott Morrison in his most recent victory, they're all ready to vote for Dutton.
So
if you're prepared to vote for Morrison, you'd vote for Dutton.
Apparently, there's going to be a heavy flu season this year.
Is there?
Yeah.
You think that might affect things?
That might take out some boomers. There'll be less of a vote.
Right. The election's not far off.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. How's that independent going in your electorate? Is she busy?
I saw a group of people on bicycles with placards at the weekend cycling around, showing her green credentials. I had a look at her website. It's all very vague. I mean, there's lots of pro green energy, and aside from that, everything else is incredibly vague, and I can't tell which side of politics she's on.
Right.
I assume she's a liberal,
It's,
given that the LNP haven't lost the seat in 20 years. I assume that she's a liberal light.
it's one of those things. I was actually looking at the change in Dutton's placards and that sort of stuff. He's gone from saying, whatever it was, you'll be better off under the LNP, to now he's actually quoting her in that saying, I'm a greenie. So they're obviously panicked about her because they've started to attack her.
I was hearing something where I think one of his lines is, are you better off than you were
When Mr.
4
Albanese was
years ago?
elected. Yeah.
Something like that. And
3
as a
years ago,
psychological sort of tactic, that's quite effective because psychologically people are reluctant to admit that they are better off, and they mentally think of the things that are bad rather than the things that are good. And so if you frame it that way, people would often say, no, I don't think I'm better off than I was 4 years ago. But if you said to them, have you ever felt like you're going to lose your job, that you're at risk, or have you felt you're not going to be able to pay your bills or these things, people would
Work
go,
choices.
no. And some other sort of questions like that. So it's just an interesting way of framing it, is to say, do you feel you're better off than you were 3 or 4 years ago? And
Can you buy eggs?
yeah, and it works at a psychological level. So Scott's losing his connection, but that's okay, Scott, because we have made it to the hour. Scott is Scott's with us next week.
So
No, I'm back here next.
from the Shark
I'm
Tank.
here next week.
Yep. Then away for a couple of weeks.
Yep.
Yeah. So anyway, not sure what next week will bring, but we'll be back with something. Thank you for the people in the chat room, Alex and Landon, and Andrew and Julia in particular, and Alison was there earlier. Good on you. We will be back next week. Bye for now.
And it's a good night from him.
He couldn't hear. I think his internet's gone.
No, it looks like very frozen.
Yeah. I'll end this. Bye.